SF Perg, I looked at their booklet briefly. You have your own copy. Thanks, Michelle. And you'll notice they're concerned with social and environmental justice, which is extremely significant if you think about societies cooperating and working together over time, as opposed to not having justice and having a big problem with, for example, inequality in terms of social outcomes, such as there are the rich people and there are the poor people, and the poor people get more and more angry, and then there's a revolution, or in terms of environmental justice, where there could be a problem of the consumption patterns of the rich people coming at the expense of the poor people. It's a complicated topic, I think. It's ever-present topic as well. It's difficult sometimes to balance between, for example, economic activity and environmental preservation, just as the same way it's complicated to balance between having incentives to work and not having people live on the street, right? This is every society struggles with this issue. As an American, I can tell you the Canadians are doing slightly better. Congratulations, but not that great compared to the European countries, so not that much congratulations. And people who are coming from other countries, China, of course, is a very interesting example where everybody was equal but poor in the 1970s and 1980s, and then when the economic reform started happening, people started getting richer, and inequality. So people rose up as on average, but also inequality rose up to the point where China was more equal than the United States. Now China is far less equal than the United States, and some people, probably all of you in the room, are benefiting from that because you're able to study abroad, and the party in China, being the de facto rulers of the country, are trying to bring more growth to the people who have been left behind, in a sense. There's this expression of, I think, growth with harmony or social harmony in China that the party is pursuing, and that idea makes sense in China just like it makes sense in the United States, where the Tea Party and the Occupy movement is very upset about exactly the same problem. There's actually no difference, really. So this is an issue that's ongoing. I looked this up because I was reading my guidebook. And I was just in Colombia a couple weeks ago, and I was reading my guidebook, and it said, it's amazing that 10%, or the country is very unequal, 10% of the population owns 45% of the wealth in the country. 10%, 45%. That's not 10%, 10%, right? So it sounds bad. And I said, wow, I wonder what the U.S. is. And 10% of the population of the United States owns 76% of the wealth in the country. So, highly unequal Colombia is way more equal than the United States. So this is those statistics are very difficult to cope with when you're used to being in this, growth, in this spectacular society. Everybody wants to come here, etc. It's just the same problem with the Canadians struggling with, pollution around oil and oil production, when apparently Canada's full of nature and trees and forests and water, except now there's problems with pollution. So national identity may conflict with statistics on the ground, and that conversation, bringing those statistics into the public debate, is probably the first step to understanding how to do something next. People in denial of what's going on is the biggest problem. Voters in denial is the biggest problem of what's going on. That kind of leads me up into your homework, believe it or not, which I posted on Canvas. It's very short, 5 questions, and you're going to be asked to be a bicycle czar. You're supposed to find ways to get people to move from cars into bicycles using different methods of motivation. So that's posted online. You can, and there's a folder on Canvas called Homeworks. That's where you'll find it. It's due next week, hard copy, either printed or actually handwritten neatly. So Hossein is Hossein here? He's supposed to be here this morning. Oh well. So Hossein can grade your homework, and if you have any questions after you download it, you can send it to me. But it's pretty straightforward. We'll get to the economics behind the homework in the class today. Speaking of which, I did succeed in uploading the video of this lecture onto YouTube, and also as well as the audio. some of you might think that the video and audio recordings are a great excuse to sleep in and watch it later on. That's fine. You can do that, but I'm not going to give you any assurances that that's going to help you learn, because there is such a thing as showing up. But if you go to my website, kysq.org/teach, there you will find this class 362, and there will be a link to the YouTube video / playlist for the videos, as well as the MP3s of the lectures. And if you are also, since half of you are here and half of you are not here, those of you who aren't here, over you, if you try and catch up with all the lectures by the end of the semester, I assure you it won't work, right? Don't skip the whole class and then try and cram the class in a 20 to 30 hour listening festival, let's call it, before the final exam. You will fail, right? But those of you who want to review something because you didn't have your notes, if you can ask me after class, that's fine. But you can also rely on this archive. But as I mentioned in the first class, these recordings are mostly for people who are not in this class, who might want to learn about resource economics. Okay? Now, any open questions on logistics or the material from the last lecture? I know I talk a lot. Sometimes you write it down, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't think, sometimes you listen. I'm not sure. But if you have stuff that's not clear, bring it up, because probably 7 other people are also not clear on it. Anyone? If you come up with something after the class, or you're just shy, send me an email. I don't have any problem reading emails, not revealing your name, and talking about the questions at hand. So let's talk about demand. And then we'll talk about supply, believe it or not. So demand is, we talk about supply and demand all the time. What is the foundation of demand? How do we know what your demand is for pencils or pens? What is your demand for scarves? How do we know that? What does that start with? What do we call that in economics? Use your imagination. I heard something, a hum. Come on, somebody. You took how many classes in economics? Did you walk out the door and it all went away? How do you choose, when you go to have lunch, how do you choose something on the menu? According to what? Tastes, thank you. Who was thinking tastes? Raise your hand if you were thinking tastes. Were you thinking taste? You weren't even thinking. Is anybody thinking here? Do I have to do a lap? I'm going to start pointing at people, obviously. This is going to work in its own way. Okay, so if we get utility from consuming a quantity of something, and we have a taste for it, what's our utility curve going to look like? Is it going to be like that? As I consume more, how does my utility work? What's the utility curve look like? I see some nods, I see some grins, I see some awkwardness. Increasing. Utility would be increasing on consumption, wouldn't it? Something like that, maybe, right? It's increasing at a decreasing rate. If you actually go over here, that means you're consuming so much you're actually disgusted with what you're consuming. Think about donuts, right? The first donut is very nice, right? 1 donut, 2 donuts. The marginal utility, this is the marginal utility, right? The second donut, the third donut, the fourth donut. Okay, you're getting a little bit full of donuts, right? And after 6 donuts, you're starting to feel sick, and then you throw up, right? Now, of course, in economics, we assume that you are clever enough to stop at the top, maximizing utility. But you maximize utility, what? Subject to what? What? Constraints, yes. And in a way, another thing. What's the other thing that you maximize utility? If this is donuts, are you always going to consume this many donuts? Why would you not consume that many donuts? You're constrained by, guess what, income, right? You don't have enough money to afford that many donuts. What's the other thing that might constrain you in terms of consumption? Donut availability, good one, but no. You have unlimited donuts in front of you. Size of your stomach, that's what Adam Smith said, but he didn't know about Krispy Kreme. What's another reason why you might not consume all those donuts? Yes? Time. Also good, but not the one I'm looking for, right? That's a version of a constraint. That's good. Are there any other goods in this world of donuts? Coffee, maybe, right? Bananas. You don't necessarily consume all the way up to the maximum utility, right? I didn't say marginal utility. Maximum utility. Your consumption is based on trade-offs among these different goods. This might be painfully obvious, but you should have said it if it was, right? You have to balance off between these different things. So what you have classically is you have some kind of indifference curve between donuts, and you've got coffee, and you're going to balance on this indifference curve according to what? Somebody already said the word. Have you seen indifference curves before? Raise your hand. Who has not seen an indifference curve? Okay, great. So if you have got an indifference curve, where is your mix of donuts and coffee going to be? Based on what? Anybody? Yes, preference. That determines the shape of the curve. Your budget constraint. Sorry? Your budget constraint, which is based on your income, right, and what? Preferences is back to the shape of the curve. And the prices, the relative prices, right? So you either are going to go here or you're going to go here. Either of these could be your total income, but the price is going to determine the slope of the curve, okay? This is just review. This is not rocket science, but on the other hand, you have to know this, right? I'm assuming you know this. That's why I'm interested in your answers. So say that this is your income and those are the relative prices. I won't go through the calculations. You already did those economics. You understand that as a price of, if I'm consuming here coffee donuts, what's going to happen if the price of donuts goes up? Two things happen. What happens to the first thing that happens? Sorry? Not exactly an income effect. The price of donuts has gone up. Huh? Well, the price of donuts gone up. How many can you buy as many donuts anymore? Less donuts, right? So, but the slope of this line is going to get bigger, smaller. Is the slope going to change at all? Is the slope going to change? No? Who thinks the slope of the line will not change if the price of donuts goes up? Who thinks the slope will change if the price of donuts goes up? Okay, we have a democratic consensus that the slope is going to change. Right? You can't buy as many donuts, so it's going more like this, right? Now, you're actually going to be worse off. I kind of drew that a little bit inside, but you're worse off because the price went up, right? So that's just the basic of substitution between two goods. Whether or not they're substitutes or complements, this curve accomplishes both of them, accommodates both of them, right? They're intermediate goods in terms of that idea of complements and substitutes. Okay, so we have, let me map the line here between these things. And we talk, and this is a nice relationship, a nice set of relationships. If we have quantity and we have utility, and it goes like this, and I want to go with quantity and marginal utility, right, or U prime, how do I map this to that? If I am consuming 1 unit of the good, where am I going to plot a dot to map from utility to marginal utility? Great. It's based on the slope, right, of the function. If the slope is high, your marginal utility is high. Let's call this high. Okay? Now I get to 2 units. Is the slope higher or lower on the second unit? Lower, right? It's here, let's say. And I go through that, and I get this set of points, which is known as the demand curve. right? That's how you find a demand curve. Remember yesterday I said we have this strange thing called, inverse demand curve, right? Why do we do this crazy inverse demand curve? This is why, one of the reasons why, okay? And you can also put price on the same axis. So now that you have a demand curve, and you've got U prime here, or you've got P here, money, and it looks like that, and the price determines the quantity, right? P1, Q1. All right, so A, B, C. How much surplus do I have? Who thinks C? C is your surplus. B is your surplus. Golly, guess what? A. Who hasn't raised their hand? Who's still asleep? I'm looking for hands here, sleepy people. You guys in the back, are you in the class? Come sit down. You guys should, give them some space. Give them some space in here. Okay. Now that we're back in Economics 1, I'm holding onto this sheet. So we're going to consume until, not satiation, we're going to consume until this point here. What is that? What's true at that point? This is just, it's like slogans. This is like bumper stickers. What is it? What's happening at Q1? Sorry? Sorry? Equilibrium. Yes. And at equilibrium, marginal utility equals marginal cost. Right? Price. What's the marginal cost? Is the price. Right? The marginal cost of this is P. The marginal cost of this is P. It's just all the way across. Right? Turtles all the way down, as they say. So that's our demand curve. Now, A is the surplus because you're paying your utility is higher than the price. What happens if we get more income to that demand curve for a normal good? It's going to shift outwards, right? Roughly speaking, we always assume that it shifts just, out like that. If you have more income, you're going to consume more of that good. What's our demand for, okay, so here's a resources example. I'm going to put two goods here, and I'm going to use utility, not marginal utility. Okay, now, there's two utility curves there. Let's just say that, this is a few units, and this is a few units, and this is many. Don't worry about the scale too much. It's relatively similar. I have two goods that I'm talking about here. One of them is water, and one of them is gold. Which curve would be appropriate for water? The left one or the right one? Which one would be appropriate for gold? Think about your taste for water and your taste for gold. Your preference for water and your preference for gold. Okay, so who's going to volunteer an answer who I haven't talked to yet? Ting, 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 ting. Yes?
I think the flatter one would be the water.
The flatter one would be the water here. Okay? And why would it be the flatter one? Does that mean if you have some water that you're happy and you have more water, you're just a little bit more happy, and so on, and if you have a little bit of gold, you're very happy?
Yeah, well, your water preferences are pretty constant throughout.
They're constant.
Well, if I have one glass of water,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be that more happy if I have like 20 glasses of water.
If you have one glass of water, you're not going to be that much more happy than when you have 20 glasses of water. Is that right?
Yeah.
The first glass of water actually keeps you alive. The marginal utility for living is high or low. Right? You're right. But your logic was right, but you picked the wrong curve. right? Because you need, literally, that is the discussion around water always. You need water to live. You don't need electricity to live. We can do this in the dark, right? Candles and everything. But you need water to live. Gold, whatever, really. I mean, if you gave it to me, great, I have gold, right? What do I do with it? I can't eat it, literally. There is an expression, money can't buy you love, for a reason, right? There are some things that just don't quantify into happiness. So I want you to keep this in mind because this is relevant when we talk about resources, because some resources are more valuable in certain circumstances than other resources. And when those circumstances change, it might change the value. And by value, I mean utility, right? That's what we're talking about here. That the utility transfers into demand. Demand transfers into often market activity, as in I'm going to buy gasoline for my car today because I get utility of moving, right? But in the end, you have to think about the foundations of these things. And when you're doing the homework, you're going to think about who am I dealing with here on their preferences, right? We have to be very aware of the preferences because the resource economics, it's very, very basic human emotions, let's say, which is directly, almost like strictly straight to utility, that is driving our consumption of these resources, and by the way, driving the policies that affect the resources. If I raise the price of water, someone will say, oh my God, you're trying to kill me and my children because I can't drink water, right? If I raise the price of gold, no one really cares, right? Except people who invest in gold. So changing the prices, raising the prices, if you're talking about resource economics and making policies to affect resources, should we take the oil out of the ground policies, then you need to be aware of how people feel about these things before those policies get, or in the course of discussing those policies. Does that make sense? That's the context. That's why you need to think about what are my preferences, and more importantly, what are the preferences of the person across the table from me? Okay? That's why this ridiculous Econ 1 lesson here has a real role in what we're doing in this class. Okay. And by the same logic, just keep that idea in mind for the water versus gold thing. If I raise the price of water in terms of elasticities, is my demand for water likely to be elastic or inelastic? Inelastic, but where? Here it's inelastic, right? Over here it's elastic, or more elastic, let's say. Let's be easy about that, right? And what you get with that, if you transfer this into a demand curve, is you have demand that's very high. Let's just make it like that even. Price, totally price insensitive, but then it goes like this. And if you think about consumption of water, and I'm using water because it's an easy one to use, we all touch on it. You think about your consumption of water, but you could use the same thing for electricity, right? The most important, here, let's step back a second here. When electricity, or when electrical power comes to the village in the middle of India or Africa, in a country where there is not really power 24/7, what is the most important thing that they plug in? And there's two answers to this. The answer from 20 years ago and the answer from today. What's the most important thing they plug in when they get a village? Sorry? Light. No. Ironically. They have light. They have fires and candles and kerosene. What do you think? Come on, you guys in the silent majority back there.
Electric water.
Nice, no. They have the river. Water or something, no. Think about yourself. You have got nothing. Someone gives you one battery or one plug. You can plug in one item around your life. Huh? What? I didn't hear it. Hmm?
I said iPhone.
iPhone. Well, actually, that's true today. When I literally was reading the story, these shepherds come out of the bush in Africa, and they plug in their phone to charge their phone, because and then it's one of these, indestructible Nokias. You can walk around for like a week, right? But they'll pay 10 cents to charge their phone, and they walk off in the bush. And they're getting the water. They have the sheep. They have a place to sleep. They're not cold, but they have to get power for their phone. 20 years ago, the answer, and still in many places, the answer is the television set or the radio, right? Now, here's an interesting question in terms of environmental justice. How do men and women differ in their priorities in terms of what's the first thing to plug in? In these, and I'm talking about developing country situations. The first thing that's the most important thing, I'll give you a hint, for men, it's the TV. Because they got to watch the game. Because they don't work. Right? The vast majority of manual labor in developing countries is actually done by women. Women don't necessarily watch TV because they're so busy doing what? Shopping. Well, hunter-gatherer, yeah, the women have to get shopping for not dying, right? So they're not getting shoes. They don't have shoes. But from a political perspective or from a social perspective, if the women are doing manual labor and they want to reduce their labor, the most common thing that they want to reduce labor in doing is what? You might have heard a rumor. Someone actually said something derivative of this, right? Have you guys read anything about the developing countries or anything like that? The dry parts of China? Dry? Dry? This utility function? Water, right? It's the woman's job to get the water. And the women who have to walk 2 hours one way and 2 hours back to bring water to cook and to wash their children, etc., they have a huge priority on water supply over television sets. But why is it that the television set is often the first thing that's plugged in? Come on, you guys, wake up. Why? Why is the TV set plugged in? The thing that guys like. Think about your family. Do you have a mother? Who has a mother here? Raise your hand. Who has a father here? All right? Have you ever heard of dad gets the big piece of chicken? Right? Dad brings home the bacon or whatever. If the guy is making the rules, then the guy says that the first priority of the village is to plug in the TV. If the women make the rules, the first priority of the village is to get the water supply. They've done this in India. They put women in charge of politics, and suddenly the villages get good water supplies. Right? It's politics. It's decision-making. It's equity. It's fairness. It's justice, etc. Right? It is resource allocation decisions at the household level, at the village level, at the national level. Guys like guns and TV. Girls like water and education. Right? And that's how these policies get made, these priorities get set. But humans, we like water. It's very interesting, you guys. I have to ask you to go outside and start looking around, okay? When you write your blog posts and you give me your insight and your wit, I want to get beyond, I plug in my iPhone, right? Think about what's going on here. You've got to say, why is this cheaper? Why, for example, is petrol or gasoline cheaper in Alberta than it is in British Columbia? Tell me why.
They produce oil.
Sorry?
Are one of they produce oil?
No, not because they produce oil. No, not because of transportation costs. That's endogenous.
Carbon taxes.
Carbon taxes, taxes on the fuel, right? The oil from Alberta can be refined into gasoline and transported at a very low cost. We did the gas station last time, right? All the way over the border. But guess what? You cross the border between Alberta and British Columbia and the price jumps by about 10 or 20 cents. 25 cents a liter. It's not because somebody had a hard time getting the next 3 meters, okay? It's because the tax. And the tax gets used for various things. We don't have to talk about that. But the BC government has decided to put a higher tax on than the Alberta government, which, believe it or not, does tax it. Right? Where's the cheapest oil or gasoline in the world? Make a guess. You don't have to tell me the exact one. Sorry? Dutch? The cheapest gas in the world? You know how much gas costs in the Netherlands? It costs about double of what it costs here. It's about 170 euros per liter, which is 250 or so, I think, Canadian. In Turkey, it's more expensive, believe it or not. Turkey, the Turkish people are not rich compared to the Dutch people. The cheapest, you had a guess or an answer?
I would guess maybe Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia? I'm not exactly sure, but it's quite cheap there, right? I know Venezuela sells it for about 6 cents a liter. And for some reason, they have gasoline shortages. I don't know why, right? And the Colombians, they charge roughly North American prices. It's about same as the United States. And if the price in Venezuela is 6 cents a liter and the price in Colombia is $1.50 a liter, what kind of economic activity would you predict between those two countries? Arbitrage?
Yeah.
Yes. Via the... Correct. Exactly. Smuggling, right? So the Venezuelan people are subsidizing drivers in Colombia, right? The people that don't have money are giving money to people who do have money in terms of, here's some cheaper fuel, right? It's government policy. But there are, you know, when they change the price of petrol or gasoline in Malaysia and Indonesia, in Malaysia, is anybody from Malaysia here? All right. So the government owns all the gas stations, most of them, but the price of gasoline is kind of printed in terms of like pen. There's no way of changing them because they only change once every couple years. Is that true or is that?
Well, I don't really pay attention.
Oh, so you don't pay attention. See, that's another thing. There's no reason to pay attention. I do remember this. It's like there's no reason to pay attention because every gas station has exactly the same price because they're all owned by the same government, and the price gets changed occasionally, right, by an act of God, basically, right? I mean, and there are people get very upset when you change the price of gasoline. But why wouldn't you get upset? Get back to the politics. If the price of iPhones go up, do you complain? If you were going to complain, who would you complain to? Samsung? What do? You switch, right? But water prices, if your water price goes up at your tap, can you complain? You can complain. Who do you complain to? Sorry? What'd you say? Or did you not say? Who do you complain to? I heard some murmurs. Who do you complain to? Your price of water goes up. Who do you complain to?
The government.
The government. The government is not Apple or Samsung. Why is the government involved in the price of water? Right? If the price of petrol goes up, gasoline goes up, in British Columbia, do you complain to the government? Maybe if they raise the tax, but in Malaysia you complain to the government because they own everything, right? In the fuel distribution system. So in some ways, the resource is being managed by the government as a monopolist, theoretically a benevolent monopolist, but sometimes the government will set the price at 6 cents a liter, then you run out of fuel. Then you have to walk. That's not a very good way of managing the resource, right? Or they set the price so low that everybody drives around. I was in Brunei, a neighboring country, where the fuel is so cheap that people just leave their cars running while they go in and have dinner. Why bother to turn off your car? That takes all this effort. Right? Who cares? It's free, pretty much, right? So the policy of the government ends up producing responses in the demand curve. If your demand curve is like that, and the price is over here, you're going to be consuming this much of the good. If I raise the price, oh my God, my rights. You're killing my rights. If I raise the price and I'm only consuming that much, well, yes, you're consuming less and maybe you're getting less utility, but at what cost? Right? What's the opportunity cost? Ends up being the question. And that's why these things matter. All right. So how do we if we have our generic demand curve, let's use an example just to nail this stuff down. Okay, here is coal. Your demand for coal, bang, is like that. Or society's demand for coal. There's not a really big difference between individual and aggregate demand for coal. There's your demand curve for coal. Now, a report comes out from an eminent scientific group at Simon Fraser University revealing that the burning of coal creates air pollution, which is going to have, is that a question, is air pollution a resource problem or an environmental problem? Environmental problem. Okay, so you hear about this report, air pollution, it's an environmental problem. There's not necessarily a way to properly price that or monitor it or to manage it. And the general public hears about this report. You're the general public. And you hear about coal producing air pollution. What happens to the demand curve? I'm going to make the price here right now, just so we have a reference point. Okay, what happens to the demand curve? Is that you? Shift to the left. Shift inwards, right? Demand shifts in because why?
They care about it.
No, not exactly. Yeah, you. We heard air pollution, and it shifts in to the left, but what is going on? What's decreased? That's the result of shifting to the left. Why is it shifting to the left? What's the mechanism going on here? Why? What's going on with the citizens? Sorry? That's the result. Preferences change. You care more. Maybe you have an inherent concern about the environment. Now that is being put into play because the report brings new information and it changes your preferences, right? Change preference, shift the demand curve. It's a classic reason to shift the demand curve in or out, right? Someone says that burning coal makes you sexy. What's going to happen with the demand curve? Huh? Outward, right? The Coal Council wants you to know that coal is sexy, right? There are advertisements around the province. Have you seen these advertisements for this liquid product? Have you seen them? Canadians drink milk, right? Sponsored by who? Huh? Who sponsored those advertisements? The milk companies. And the ironic part of this is that they want you to consume more milk. I'm not sure if I see an advertisement for milk, I think, God, I need some milk, right? But it works for Pepsi and Coca-Cola, right? Or iPhones or Samsung. But one of the reasons that they say this is because in Canada, the milk industry is entirely, how do you call it, part of the government agricultural programs. The U.S. has a terrible milk program, and I think the Canadians have copied it, right? So now they have too much milk because the price of milk is so high for the farmers. They're like, please drink more milk. We have too much, right? Otherwise, we have to export it, basically to China, right? So coal. Back to coal. Coal is sexy. Okay, now some innovative people in the laboratories come up with scrubbers to remove pollution from coal plants. When you burn coal, you produce pollution, and you use a scrubber to reduce the amount of air pollution coming out of the plant. What happens to this curve? What happens to the demand for coal?
It moves back out.
It moves back out, right? Now, is it because your taste for coal has changed? What happened? What's going on here? Kind of. It's not because you feel good about it again. It's a much more direct.
The cost of producing coal is increased.
Not exactly. That's part of it. But that's not what I'm talking about right now. That could be part of it. Scrubbers. Here's a supply of scrubbers. New technology. What happens to the supply curve for scrubbers? New technology makes scrubbers cheaper. What happens to the supply curve for scrubbers? Steeper, no. I heard you, but I want to get someone else. In the back with the eyes, you. You're waking up. What happens to the supply curve for scrubbers? Shift to the right, because scrubbers are now cheaper, right? And scrubbers are substitutes or complements for coal consumption. Complements, right? So because you're consuming, all things equal, you're consuming more scrubbers, and that means that you're consuming more coal, right? You didn't change your taste for coal, it just became more convenient to use coal, right? If someone comes up with a coal-powered iPhone, you consume more coal, right? All right. Now, the government comes along and it says, but coal is still producing carbon, which we don't like. We're going to put a tax on carbon. What does that look like? What's going to happen here with this diagram here? We're now back where we were before. Let's go over here to make it easier. Here's the scrubbers scenario. The price is the same. Quantity is shifted out. Q2. The government says, oh my God, carbon's terrible. We're going to have a carbon tax. What happens to this diagram here when we have a carbon tax? What does that affect? Does it affect your taste for coal? Yes or no? No. God, 3 people were awake here. Does it affect your taste for coal? No, thank you. All right, carbon tax. Does it affect the price of scrubbers? No. What happens? Yes? The price of coal increases via what measure? Okay. And I'm going to try, I don't want to do a tax, I could do a tax wrong and ask you if it's wrong, but basically let's just say it this way. Right? We have a tax. So P2, P3, this is P1, etc. This is P whatever. And put a higher tax and, oh shoot, let's make it higher still, sorry. Bad diagram, sorry. Here's P3. So the price goes up and the tax is this box here, which you've seen a million times, and now we're at quantity 3. You should be very conversant with these types of manipulations. These should be bread and butter. This should be the stuff that if you actually took economics classes and someone is at a cocktail party and they say to you, well, what about the tax on coal? You'd be like, well, tax on coal is going to put a wedge in between the price of the market and the final price, right? You'll know that stuff because you wake up every morning and you start doing demand curves. And then you do supply curves for breakfast. All right? These relationships will help you understand what's going on, which will help you understand what to do or what not to do. That's why we use the demand curves and supply curves. They may not be accurate in terms of representing true demand and the number of tons and the number of prices or whatever the hell it is, but at least you know the direction of what's going on, because microeconomics basically is only about directions. If you know the direction, you're kind of done. The magnitudes, there's lots of people studying magnitudes and trying to quantify stuff. Most of the time they're wrong. Don't waste your time on that. Okay? You waste your time on the directions. That's what we want to understand. If I wanted to reduce the consumption of coal in Canada, I would do what? If I want to reduce it, I would do what? Tax it. If I want to increase the use of cars in Canada, what do? I want you to drive more. I'm the government. What do I do? What? Increase the tax to make you drive more. I don't think so. Decrease the tax, yes. I give you money to drive, right? You get in the car, you swipe your card, you drive 10 kilometers, you take cash out, right? It's awesome. Okay, you need to know these moves, these directions. Should be very fluid. You need to also say it out loud so I can hear you, okay? It's lovely whispering, but I need to hear you. Okay, now, here's a strange thing. If I have two demand curves, and one is shaped like this, and one is shaped like that, and let's call this water, and let's call this lattes, latte. And I am the government, and I want to raise revenue with as smallest distortion to behavior as possible. There's the price. The price of water and the price of lattes. Let's just assume it's the same for a moment here. I want to raise revenue with the smallest distortion to behavior as possible. What do I put my revenue in? What do I put a tax on? What's your answer? What did Facebook tell you? Didn't necessarily tell you anything? You already had an answer. Guy in the cap in the back. Yes, you. Great cap. I want to raise revenue. Which one do I tax more? Water or latte?
Water.
Good. Because why?
Because the demand is more elastic.
Inelastic, exactly. I put a tax of this much. If I were to put a tax on lattes, I would have a change in Q that is far greater than the change in Q here, right? This is known as Ramzi Pricing if you're tracking on names. There's a guy named Ramzi. He died at 26 years old, published enough papers to overthrow economics and mathematics. Genius guy. Geniuses tend to die young. Idiots also die young. Sometimes we don't know the difference. Okay, now you're my economic advisor. You come along, you say you should tax water. Okay, my political advisor. What happens next? The other guy with a great cap. If you wear hats, you're going to get called on. Okay, the guy next to him. You don't have a hat. What happens if I put a tax on water? Are you in the back? You're standing up. You want to come sit down? Too many hats. You, yes. Sorry. People are going to complain. Why are they going to complain about taxing water, which is very efficient compared to taxing lattes? In some ways, yes. I would. That's a good logic. That's a good logic. And people will tell you that this is the end of the class. People will tell you that it's okay to tax lattes because really we don't need lattes. But we do need water, right? So now the government is stuck in a paradox or a quandary called, should I tax something that is going to be efficient, or I'm going to tax something which is going to be politically easier, right? So they go after taxing lattes, and suddenly everybody's drinking cappuccinos. Damn, they got fooled. All right, that's the end of the class. I'll see you guys on